It's Rebecca and Kyle again.
Yeah.
To talk to you today from our beautiful garden about communication. We're having some thoughts about communication and clarity of communication.
Doodle wants to make an appearance. I'm here too, he says.
Yeah.
Yeah, so should I read that little piece?
Yeah.
This is so good.
So Rebecca and I were having a conversation this morning about communication, and I had bumped up against something yesterday that was a very good example of poor communication, and it things that had been confusing for about a year between a few parties just got suddenly really clear, and it was just all in a matter of being present and speaking clearly and not assuming anything, and there's
Outside!
So I want to just talk a little bit about that with each other and to you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I do, every morning I do a Course in Miracles reading, and it just so happened that today when we should decide to talk about communication, A Course in Miracles reading was on communication, so this was pretty cool. So it says, the ego's illusions are quite specific, although the mind is naturally abstract. Part of the mind becomes concrete, however, when it splits. The concrete part believes in the ego, because the ego depends on the concrete. The ego is the part of the mind that believes your existence is defined by separation. Everything the ego perceives is a separate whole, without the relationships that imply being. The ego is thus against communication, except insofar as it is utilized to establish separateness rather than to abolish it. Yep. So this is a really great, the whole thing is great, but I just love that piece about the ego is against communication.
Yeah. It's interesting, I was saying to think about, like, when you're having an interaction with someone, and for instance, my example earlier we were talking was just asking someone a simple question, like a simple direct question.
Yeah. Like,
Rebecca, do you want the blue shirt or the green shirt? And you're like, I want the shirt with a collar.
Yeah.
And they both have a collar.
Right.
There's like these, it seems odd, that seems like an odd example, but I notice this in my work. Sometimes I'll ask a client, do you want the red one or the blue one? Like, I want the square one, and they're both square, and there's just this disconnect, and I wonder about that, and I know I probably do that myself sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm not present, I'm not willing to really listen to what's being asked, and what part of my ego is engaged when I give an answer that I know is not the one they're asking for.
Right. Well,
or vice versa.
Yeah, like if we go off of what that just said, then it has to be the part of us that sees ourselves as separate, and that would be like, oh well, I'm unique, or I'm special, or I'm the best, or I'm not worth it, or like whatever.
Special doesn't have to be good.
Right. Yeah. And usually when we think we're special, it's because we think that we're insignificant, or like we're trying to make up for something, right?
Right.
So it's the ego, the identity, the parts of us that we've cemented, right? Because it's also talking about the concrete. It's like what we're so sure of as real, that is where the ego resides, because the only place it can live is in some like concept of self, or of life, or of others, or of reality itself, that we are certain of, to the point that we are certain that it will never change, it will never be any other way. I am this way, that person is that way, the world is like this is how it will happen, and we just get caught in this predictable,
already always listening.
Yeah, this predictable,
that's what
almost
I keep
certain
hearing
future.
In my head.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes our communication is not smooth and direct and easy, because we're listening with all the filters. Yeah. And I know sometimes for me, like, a frustrating thing that will happen is when I ask someone a very direct question and I get this really odd answer back, and I'm like, how are you not? It's a one sentence, it's very simple. And I get, like, thinking about the way we're, framing this, that it's just, it's already always listening, to use a landmark term, it's just assumptions and all the different things we already know, that I think sometimes even the simplest communication directed toward us, we interpret it as something completely different.
Yeah.
And like I was envisioning, asking a question and having these answers coming in different directions. Like, what are you answering? Because what I'm asking is so clear. And that's where we get disconnected from each other.
Yeah. It's like we're trying to, like, show off, right? It's like every question or like opportunity to have a conversation with someone, instead of it being an opportunity for communication, it's an opportunity for the ego to, you know, like fluff up its feathers and be like, oh, well, this is what I do. Like, I'm a genius at this, and I'm really good at this, and I think you're like this, and, you know, this question is not even phrased properly, and you should say it this way or that way, or, you know,
or sometimes
like,
to hold
whatever.
people away. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that when I'm trying to have an interaction with someone, a conversation with someone, and it feels like it's just disconnected, I feel like there's something there about the ego holding a wall between.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting thing to think about and to notice, you know, when we might be doing that ourselves. I mean, because I can't see that in other people unless it's present in myself, obviously. So it makes me curious to think about when that might be showing up in myself.
Well, that takes me to like wanting to share where I experienced this for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been kind of noticing this recently. Places where I become afraid of being like deeply vulnerable. I tend to have like really deep insights a lot of the time. And I find that I really love to live from that place. I find it really satisfying and fulfilling. It's also a very simple place where a lot of listening happens and there's not a whole lot of talking to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really confronting to be totally authentic about like the challenges that I encounter in those places, because what I've discovered is that a lot of the time it confronts other people. Like, it encourages people to go to that deep place in themselves, and a lot of people are like really resistant to going deep because of what you discover and find, and what, you know, you have to ultimately give up, and so it's kind of like I have created a fear in myself of going deep into like being vulnerable with people because I'm afraid of their reaction or their response. And so it's like this protective thing. So like I'll be in a conversation with someone, I'll have this really juicy insight, and I'll be like, ooh, and I start monitoring myself. And it's like, oh, like if I say that, then this person might get upset, or this person might think that I'm like, I think that I'm better than them, or you know, and I have like this kind of string of fears. And
every plane today.
Yeah. And I, you know, and then I shortchange myself, and I shortchange the other person what value they might have gotten out of my sharing, right? And of course it's something that I'm discovering uniquely in that moment. And then I have this like diminished experience of myself. Yeah. Like, wow, I didn't say that thing, and instead I listened to that fear, and I didn't get vulnerable, and it's like chips away a little bit at my experience of myself. Yeah. And I think this happens in life with everyone. We just like go around diminishing ourselves all the time because we're afraid to speak our hearts.
I think that's true, and I think that goes hand in hand with something that we all do, which is making assumptions. One of the pieces of the conversation I had yesterday was all about each of us having made an assumption about the other based on sort of outside information, but not just clearly going to each other and asking, and we're like, oh, and then it got really clear really fast, and I was like, wow, that's just such a good reminder, you know, not to assume that you know what the other person is going to feel or say, or that assume that they get what you're thinking. I think that that's a big piece of it, because we all tend to do that.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that reminder for myself, because I can tend to do that. I can tend to think people understand them a bit more thoroughly than they probably do in some instances. So it's just a good reminder to be clear.
Yeah.
Repeat.
Yeah, until you're like, you can feel that you're both on the same.
Yeah. One of the things I did yesterday was when this person and I were talking, I would say, so what I'm hearing from you, and I would repeat what he had said, and he'd be like, yes, and we'd be like, okay, great, and then we'd do that back and forth, and by the end there was no question.
Right.
You know, there was complete clarity, and it was
clear.
Just, yeah, it was, and I felt so much lighter.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a big relief, so. Clear communication. Yes, we're in a flight pattern.
Yeah, there was no airplanes until we pressed record.
I know.
And I was like, oh, the airplanes are coming in now. So, Yeah, why don't we talk about, like, ways that we, like, techniques or things that we do in order to communicate clearly or ensure that we have communicated clearly.
That's a good idea.
For me, I go off of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can tell, oh, wow, like, I feel really incomplete about something. Like there's something there for me, right? I think about a certain person or a certain incident or whatever, and then there's, like, all these thoughts and all of these feelings and all of this stuff that comes up. And I know that it has to happen, that communication has to happen in relationship with the person, because that, call it incompletion, is occurring between us. It's not just over here, it's something that also needs to be said over there.
Mm-hmm.
So, for me, I tune in to my experience. How am I experiencing the relationship? You know, and that could be the relationship to something that happened. It can be a relationship to a person. It can be a relationship to God, or a place, or a community. You know, it's literally, like, we have relationships with everything. Like, I have a relationship to this bench. I have a relationship to you. I have a relationship to the dog. So everything happening in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I tune into what does the relationship feel like.
Mm-hmm.
And I know if it doesn't feel completely just like ease, total peace, if there's something there, even if it's positive, I think a lot of the time we can focus on the negative. Like, oh, if it feels bad, then I need to say something. But it can also be like, it can feel good, and maybe you need to acknowledge someone.
Something needs to be expressed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I tune into that feeling, and I notice what's there, and then I commit myself to communicating with love and respect and clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I may or may not ask for guidance depending on how triggered I might be. Like, if I'm really angry, I may, you know, say, hey, I could use some help with this. You know, like, maybe I shouldn't be the one doing this, actually. Maybe you could do this. So I do that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, other times it doesn't feel so dire, and I don't necessarily feel like I have to, like, desperately call on. It just feels like I'm already tuned in,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll say whatever I need to say, and I'll continue to tune into that feeling, and then I'll notice when it's gone, when that's done, that joy has been expressed, or that anger has been expressed, or whatever, and I'm doing this in a really personally responsible way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not saying, you did this, and you made me angry, or like, wow, like, you did this thing, and you know, like, I'm so happy because you know, it's more like, oh, my experience of that was this, and I, you know, I feel as a result of that just, you know, so joyful, and, you know, and I want to express gratitude for the expression that you created, and, you know, that creativity or that love or whatever it was, and I'm just so in appreciation for that. And, you know, there's, like, an acknowledgement there, but it's also being personally responsible. In anger or, like, negative emotions, instead of blaming someone, like, being the victim of something, it's more like, I'm experiencing this, and, you know, I'm impacted by, and blah, blah, blah. But it's not like, it's your fault, you're a terrible person, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not projecting out onto, but, like, noticing what's over here.
Right. Yeah. It's the wording I was using recently in another conversation that was dealing with something that was very sensitive. Is I kept reminding myself to, I always, before I have a conversation of gravity or, you know, anything of really significance, I will check in with myself and just breathe into a really neutral space. And one of the things that I do in talking to another person is I will say about my feelings that this is how it occurred to me. This occurred to me, or you occurred to me as, because I know that I'm responsible for my feelings. Yeah. The other person's not responsible for me not understanding them, or me being hurt, or whatever my feelings are. I'm responsible. Yeah. So it's always, it's for me, it's become a really valuable and really powerful tool in conversation, especially when you're not happy with someone or they're not happy with you. It's not the person that, I'm not blaming you. I'm not making you wrong. I'm telling you how it occurred for me. Yeah. My experience of it, like what you're saying. Yeah. And then when I'm going into a conversation, I notice one of the things I can tend to talk really quickly, as I'm sure it's evident on the video. One of the things that really has become a powerful tool for me when I'm having an important conversation, as I was yesterday, is to slow down my speaking so that each word is thoughtfully created and mindfully expressed. And in doing that, I find that I speak much more from my heart. And then as I'm speaking to the other person, to say, does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm, is that clear? And if it's not, then making it clear. And it's just, it can be this really beautiful dance if both people or the group of people are willing to speak from that space and to slow down and really be present to every word.
Yeah.
That's become such a powerful thing for me.
Yeah.
And I notice that when I see other people modeling that as well, I'm like, that feels so much better than, or assuming, or, the misunderstandings that can happen in the space of all that.
Yeah, that reminds me of what we were talking about before we started the video, which was, you can be source over your communication or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does it take to be really at the source of the words that come out of your mouth? And intentional about that.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can be at source over different levels of things. And I was listening to this book. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Dodson. He has this book, Levels of Energy, and then a book called Journeys in Spectral Consciousness, which is, it just turns out to be like having a lot of really great information and exercises for like how to raise your vibration and, how to notice certain things and stuff like that. And he was talking about being source over your experience, and then next level is over your communication, and then thoughts, and your attention, and like your entire reality. And so, like beingness is the first level at which we can be source, and then we can be source over communication. Those are kind of the two easiest to, get a grasp on. And I just think that is so important if you're someone who's really interested in self-development, like beingness, and, really like coming into being a like fully creative, compassionate being, call it enlightenment, call it awakening, call it whatever, but, whatever your word is. There's a lot of them out there, but it's all the same thing. We're all talking about the same thing. But it's going to involve at some point, like, being responsible for who you're being.
Yeah.
And being responsible for the words that come out of your mouth.
And really getting present to how significant that is.
Yeah.
I was saying to someone recently that, and this person's reflected to me that something had happened and they just really hadn't grasped the impact. And I reminded them of the butterfly effect. And I'm like, look, every word, every thought, it all matters. And if we brought that much attention into all of our communication in our job, with our family, with ourselves, can you imagine how much more clear and powerful we would all be with each other?
Yeah.
If we really got present to the fact that every word I'm uttering right now matters.
Yeah.
And every thought I'm having as I'm uttering those words, it's all flowing into whatever it is that I'm sending out as my vibration, whatever I'm trying to attract. It's all about how I'm communicating.
Yeah.
And when I really get present to how powerful that is, I notice it in my life. I notice it everywhere. I notice everything kind of meeting me there and going, see, yes, and it feels that way. And when I notice it lacking in my life, then everything feels difficult. And like, and I feel like I'm walking through a room of jagged mirrors, and I don't, it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but it's so powerful.
That reminds me, what you just said reminds me of something that I read in A Course in Miracles a little while back, which I talked about in a video on my page. I actually read the whole passage, but the part that always like hits me is all thoughts create form at some level.
Yes.
So like we are creating. We're constantly, we take for granted the creative power of our mind because we're afraid. We are actually afraid of how powerful we are. And so we deny the power of our mind so that we can avoid it and create other reasons as to why we're doing that. And then ultimately, it's still doing it. You cannot turn off the creative power of your mind. It is everything. Everything that we look around at is part of our mind.
Right.
This entire reality, like, welcome to the Matrix. That's
Yeah.
the whole point of, of that idea.
Yeah.
Is like, we are holding this reality together with our thoughts.
And I think the ego thing is interesting because I would imagine someone hearing that we're more powerful than we realize. Where I could imagine the mind going, and where my mind would have gone years ago, is that's ego.
Yeah.
Cocky, self-assured, whatever that is. But what I know now, what I notice, and what I believe is that fully experiencing, accepting, and surrendering to and stepping into how powerful we are is the opposite of ego.
Yes.
It's the ego fighting against it. It's the ego that doesn't want it. It's the ego that gets afraid of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't want to be a powerful communicator because that's scary, because that would call, what would happen if I was actually really clear and powerfully communicating with everyone all the time? It's like, it's kind of like what if I made a huge success out of my life and suddenly became really, we get afraid of it. I think that's.
I can remember the moment I discovered what humbleness really was, which, like, my ego's distortion of what humbleness was prior to that was like this groveling kind of a thing. Like, oh, like, I'm nothing. Like, I'm just like this little thing.
False humility.
Like,
is what that is.
Exactly. False humility.
Yeah.
And then when I really, I discovered it, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It was realizing that I am amazing, and so are you, and that's what it is. It's like, we're so cool, and so are you. We're like, let's all, like, be really excited and celebrate, like, who we get to be and how powerful we are, and that's what real humbleness is.
Yeah.
It's this, like, honesty about who I am and who you are and who we get to be and what we get to create and how awesome is it that we get to live this life, and that's what it is.
And also just noticing that we're the same.
Yeah.
I think that's for me true humility. It's like, I'm no more special or different than you.
Exactly.
We're the same.
We are.
So what I see in you, I see it has to be present in myself, and vice versa. And it's,
We're all one.
Indeed. Indeed. Good, bad, and everything in between.
Yep. We're all creating it together.
Well, I'm going to personally take a stand this weekend for myself to really be present in every moment about my communication.
Me too.
And to speak each word with intention and thoughtfulness, mindfulness.
Clarity.
Yeah.
Compassion.
Love.
Consideration. Yes.
Love. Cool.
Cool.
All right. Next
Bye.
time. Where's the thing? Did I stop it yet? Nope.